This is brought to you by Booktrib, the leading source of book news and reviews. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with an excellent fellow PI novelist who just released her fourth novel in the Roxannes Background series. This one's called Once You Go This Far. It's excellent, as I can attest, having
Thank you.
got an early draft and plowed through it. So Kristen, welcome. And we were just talking before we went live about releasing a book during these very odd times. Can you tell me a little bit about how, that sensation of releasing something when we're still in lockdown?
Sure. So when all of the lockdowns began back in March, like I sort of thought, oh, by July, maybe things will be back. And that of course wound up not happening. So it was sort of weird. Like there was like a flurry of folks who had book launches planned for right around that time in April. And they were really like thrown for a loop. And I was sort of like, oh, I bet it'll still be okay by the time July comes around. And then as time went on, it was like, no, I'm going to be in the same boat. So I really think that like Zoom fatigue is a real thing for people, and they're just like tired of watching folks just talking to the void. So I wanted to kind of do something different. I wound up doing a crowdcast with another writer, Mindy Mejia, and we were also joined by my audiobook narrator, Allison Ryan, who worked on Mindy's books as well as mine. So that was really cool. We talked a little bit about publishing and about audiobooks, and then we had Allison perform the first chapter of Once You Go This Far, which was really, really neat for me. Just, you know, usually at these types of events, I'll do the reading and it's like, I'm an okay reader, but like Allison was amazing. It was really, really fun. So that was a nice, it was like different, and it wasn't just, you know, me talking to my webcam, which I really appreciated, and had a really nice turnout. But I really miss like being able to actually interact with people in a bookstore for sure.
Yeah, there's been a couple, and I attended some early on, and I totally get the Zoom fatigue even as we're on Zoom as we speak. Right. But there's the Noir at the Bar series that, you know, they're located in a bunch of different cities, and they're really a great kind of like coming together community of crime writers in whatever city. And they've done a bunch of Zoom ones, you know, and they can go on for some time when you have a dozen authors reading. I love the concept and keep the community going, but it's tricky. It's tricky connecting.
Yeah, there's nothing like the energy of like being in a room with people, and you can sort of see what's working and what they're responding to, and adjust what you're saying, or adjust your tone based on, you know, what you're getting back from the audience. And like I wouldn't have really even described that as something that I really liked, but like having had to do so many events without that, like it's something that I would definitely miss.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of events and crowds and coming together of writers, you know, and for good reason, BoucherCon we know was canceled this fall, and for those uninitiated, BoucherCon is kind of the it's like, I guess it's the Comic-Con of the mystery world, where it's really a pretty great event that I try to get to every year. And in connection with that, a lot of the awards take place around then. And the night before is the Sheamus Awards, which was kind of the impetus for this interview today between us. You're a two-time winner. You won for Best First Novel. I was one of the nominees, but I was definitely very, very stoked for you. And then you won back-to-back the following year for Best Hardcover, which is fantastic. And you know, I kind of just wanted to chat a little bit about these awards that, you know, granted the Sheamus Award is a niche award because it's for private eye novels, and there's, I would say, maybe half a dozen, you know, the highest being the Edgar Award in our mystery field. But and I'm always curious of, you know, how you feel about, you know, not just being nominated, but winning one of those, what it does in terms of your relationship with your publisher and the faith that they maybe, you know, is renewed because of those awards. You know, speak to that a little bit as a two-time winner of the Sheamus.
Sure. So it's an incredible honor. Just, you know, I think all of us writers are like, we're super neurotic and think that our work is probably secretly bad, even though, like, we get our books published, we're still like, I don't know, was it good? So, there are many, many good books that don't win awards, so it's not the only marker of quality, but it definitely, like, it feels really good. It does. It's like, it's really exciting to be sort of like singled out and to be nominated for an award or to win an award. And like to see the other names that you are nominated alongside of, it's just like, wow, these are writers that I have looked up to, and now I'm sort of being mentioned in the same breath as them. It's really kind of a surreal, very cool experience. And then the fun thing about being nominated is that even if you don't win, you can always say, Sheamus nominated author, or my first book was also nominated for an Anthony Award. So, my publisher still includes that in my bio on everything.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those, it's just like, it was a moment in time and it passed, but it's like being on that list is really kind of exciting, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
I was considered one of the best at this period, and that's really kind of fun. But I love being able to see, like, on my book covers, there's like the little Sheamus award-winning author stamp. So, even on a book that hasn't been nominated for awards, like, that's something that we can still say about, like, my body of work. And I mean, I feel like it seems crazy to me to, like, be talking about, like, my body of work, I'm this award-winning author. Like, that's not how I feel about it at all, of course. Like, it's just like, it's very exciting and hard to believe. In that, think back 5 years and I wasn't even sure if I was going to try to find an agent. So, like, to have everything come together so quickly and so well is just an incredible honor, for sure.
Yeah. And you reference this, but it's kind of an evergreen achievement in a way that, whether it's on your own personal author site or on your Wikipedia page or whatever, that tag, whether it's Sheamus winner or nominee or Anthony winner or nominee, that will always kind of live with your, people go back and reference books, and it's a good feeling,
Yeah, it really is. It's really good. And it's like, I say that knowing that there are books that I love so much that haven't been nominated for awards, and so it's not like the be all and end all of what makes a good book, but it's just like a little extra thumbs up in your corner, and I think that's really fun.
Yeah. And if I'm sure you've done the same, but if you look back at past winners, and it's not just like the fellow nominee list, but past winners, it's kind of a who's who of my bookshelf in a way.
Right. Yeah.
And particularly I've seen you, now you're being referenced as, like, in the tradition of Sue Grafton and Sarah Perensky, Sarah Gran, who is a contemporary, but still she's someone I really think that the world of is a
She's so good.
She's incredible.
Yeah.
But that's it. I'm curious of who are some of your other touchstone authors. They don't have to be, I just rattled off female PI authors. They don't have to be in that particular vein, but I'm curious who are some of the authors that you really look to as inspirations.
Well, I would definitely say Sarah Gran is just incredible. I like, it's devastating that there's only 3 books in her series so far. I want there to be 1 million, and I want to read them all immediately. Like, she's just so good. She writes a PI character, but it's not just a PI series. It also sort of has this mythology of the character's early life with like this comic book series about a teen detective. It's woven in so well. Like, you say that and it sounds like, oh, that sounds like a gimmick, but it's just, she does it so well. It's so good.
So it's like existential PI.
Yes, exactly. I read like a review of one of her books once that said, like, this is what would happen if the musician Nico Case became a private investigator. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly right, actually.
I think I have, as I reach over. Yeah, this one. I mean, this is like near, like right near my, within reach a lot. The City of the Dead, and I really love New Orleans set literature, and that one, she gets the stage right.
That book is perfect from beginning to end. It's incredible. But I also, some of the other series that I read that really sort of shaped what I wanted to write, the Robert B. Parker Spencer series was something that I read really early on and sort of it's a classic in terms of like, this is exactly what this genre is. Like Spencer has been in like how many books now? Like there have to be like close to
Dozens.
100.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Yeah.
Like Mr. Parker is deceased, but the series is continued now by Ace Atkins, and I think he does
Yeah.
a really good job of capturing that voice. But that's like a really like an evergreen sort of always relevant type of character, and I love that. Like dropping into a new mystery each time, but you're familiar with the character, so you go into this world that's familiar even though the story is different. And I think that there's just something really fun about, as a reader, following a character across many stories. And sort of like it's like each book is its own entity, of course, but it also exists as a part of an overall arc, which is cool. And then there are some queer crime writers that I've always looked up to. Joseph Hansen, who wrote the Dave Branstetter series, Sandra Scopatone, who wrote the Lauren Lorano series. So there's just so many examples of great PI series that are like, as soon as I discovered that type of story, like I knew that I wanted to write them eventually.
Yeah, I had very similar experience. I thought of that. You know, there's that famous Ross McDonald line of "It's all one case," where you know you're coming back for the character, and
Right.
you know, when that character really kind of gets into your bones, like you know, it becomes a really pleasant compulsion to continue to go back to, you know, and you know, I want to see what Dave Robichaux's up to, even though James Lee Burke maybe has told the same story at least a dozen times. I'm still going to read, you know, whatever twist he has on dark Southern Louisiana mischief and crime.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I want to talk more about Roxanne Weary, and you referenced, you know, some queer crime writers that you really enjoy, and a key part of Roxanne Weary's personality is that she's identifies as bisexual, which, let's face it, is not a common characteristic in the PI world. And maybe you could speak a little bit to that and how that helped shape her character.
So part of what I wanted to do when I sat down to write the series is I wanted to write a bisexual PI. I identify as bi as well, and it's just like that's not an identity that you see represented in the genre. Like crime fiction is a little behind the curve in terms of inclusivity in general, and so often a character's sexual orientation is just like used as a plot device or, you know, a stereotype. It's not often presented well as just an organic part of a person's character and identity. And so that was something that I really wanted to play with through the lens of this PI character. So I wanted to just write someone who, like, she's bi, but it's not like, this isn't the Roxanne Weary bisexual mystery series, you know, like that's just one element of her identity. And I hope that it feels very natural and organic and it makes sense. And like so often when a bisexual person is portrayed in anything, it's like they're often portrayed as being devious or being slutty. And like, you know, I'm sure there are devious, slutty bisexuals out there, but like it is in no way related to being bi. It's just related to their personality. And that's kind of something that I think it's really important to like separate from that identity, is like, let's write characters that don't meet all of those stereotypes. That's sort of how we ultimately change the narrative. So really it started with me wanting to write the kind of character that I had always wanted to read, but I hadn't ever found.
Right. And there's not a lot of natural touchstones you can go back to. And in this latest book, Roxanne's in a relationship with a man who immensely patient seeming boyfriend, based on Roxanne is not the easiest of partners, regardless of who she's with. But I found that dynamic really really interesting, just the way you portrayed her relationship with him versus past relationships, and referencing, you know, a not so great one previously. And you know, and her family relationships are also, it's pretty fraught. I mean, I think all PIs tend to come from a pretty twisted background, almost by necessity. But
yes,
you know, tell me a little bit about Roxanne's background, I mean, I love always like the etymology of names, and I wonder if putting your last name as Weary was intentional, like a world weary, soul weary type
Um,
character.
so that's a good question. It wasn't really intentional, but it was one of those things where I had named her Roxanne. I wasn't sure what her last name was going to be, and I was sort of just like writing the story anyway. And I there's an actor named Jake Weary, and I saw his name on the credits of something that I was watching, and I saw that as a last name, and it was just like something clicked into place. I was like, that's it. Of course that's her last name. Like it was perfect. Um, but Roxanne's background is she's the daughter of a cop who was shot and killed in the line of duty a few months before the beginning of the first book in the series. And that's really kind of a thing that has shaped her life, not because she had a great relationship with him and misses him, but because she had an awful relationship with him. And something about, you know, when someone dies, your relationship with them is then set in stone. Like there's no opportunity of, oh, maybe this will work out eventually, or maybe someday we'll get around to patching things up. Like, no, Roxanne is now and forever someone who had a shitty relationship with her dad. And I think part of her relationship with her father was difficult because they didn't get along, but she's very much like him. And I think that is like, that's often the case when you really can't get along with someone. It's because like they're too similar to you. You know, common ground is great, but like you know, that's why opposites attract, of course. Like too similar and you just really kind of butt heads. So when people tell Roxanne that she reminds them of her father, like she gets it, but it also can be sort of problematic for her just because like she didn't like him all that much a lot of the time. So what does it mean for her that she's like that? But then, you know, in her family, she has two brothers. One of her brother, who's a couple years older, Andrew, she has a good relationship with. Her oldest brother, Matt, she doesn't really get along with, but he does kind of have some redeeming qualities that come up in this most recent book. So her little family of her two brothers and her mom is very much part of her life because, like, you know, she didn't get along with her father, but Roxanne and her brothers adore their mother. And so, like, obviously this has been a very difficult time the last couple years for them. So, you know, their family is very much, she's like always going over for a family dinner. And it's just like, it's just a part of her life and she can't really separate herself from them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bookend this latest book. I mean, literally the opening sentence and the last sentence, without any spoilers, is family with her brother. You know,
Right.
it's I mean, it's kind of a essential piece, even when they're discovering some family secrets that she'd probably rather not maybe have known.
True. Yes.
I wanted to talk as well about, because I think you and I probably both wrestle with this. My character in my series, Duck Darley, is also a heavy drinker and likes to reach for the whiskey, as Roxanne does. And I'm always kind of forever like a little bit sensitive to like, where does it become trope because the PI character is, you know, so often a heavy drinker, and where is it an honest portrayal of someone who that's their coping mechanism to get through some extreme stress.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because that's something I'm always thinking about of like, you never want to go into caricature with it. You have to show the true impact and the harm it can do, as well as maybe some of the calming effects.
Right. Well, I think that, like, first of all, like if you ask Roxanne, does she have a drinking problem? She would probably say that she has an unhappiness problem, not a drinking problem exactly. And I think that she sort of turns to whiskey as a coping mechanism to unwind, to sort of like turn off her brain, because she's always thinking and examining and assessing. And that's part of what makes her a good detective and good at figuring out cases that other people can't solve. But it is also, it's exhausting for her to be constantly doing that. But I think that, you know, part of it is we don't want to write characters that are just sort of like drinking whiskey and never having to examine the meaning of it or the impact of it. So like, especially as the series goes on,
Totally. Yeah.
writing more about the way that she feels about her own drinking and being more like intentional and thinking like, should I have this drink or should I limit myself to a set number of drinks, and to keep it from being just like mindless, like it's not like lighting a cigarette. It's not just like a thing for characters to do with their hands. Like there's real implications. So I think it's really important to be intentional about it and to sort of use it to show growth in the character, not necessarily good growth always, like growth can go either way. But to really use it as a barometer for the emotional state.
Yeah, I fully agree. In fact, I tried my last one. I tried to put my character on the weed only wagon as trying to just recognize that it had gone too far, and it was trickier to write without that crutch.
Right.
The character reaching for the crutch. But it's I always like go back to these classic like old PI novels where the bottle of whiskey is in the drawer at the office. And let's face it, like if you have a bottle of whiskey in the drawer at your office, like you've gone kind of you've surpassed a certain level of drinking. I don't care what career you're in, but it just it's such a trope in those ways. Like before I went out, I pulled out the bottle and had a slug. It's like, okay, and then you hopped in your car.
Right, exactly. You got in your car and you drove 20 miles. Like, what are you doing? Like, you need to go home.
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully I think that's changing. There's a lot of the classic ones that really stand up the test of time, and there's plenty that don't.
Right.
But tropes in tropes in PI fiction are part of. There's an architecture there that's part of the reason we love them. But how do you navigate not just the hard drinking cliche, but what are some ways you try to navigate around the tropes and keep them honest?
Well, I think that a trope is like a neutral force. It's not automatically good or bad. It really just depends on what you do with it. Another one that I definitely have used in the books is the idea of the law enforcement significant other, which is like a trope that saves time because it allows the detective to sort of get a shortcut to information. And like, I think that if you don't write that correctly, it could come off feeling very like, oh, this is how convenient that there's this person who's just always there to provide information. And so to sort of make that feel more realistic, I've tried to have that be a source of tension between Roxanne and Tom in a lot of moments where like she wants information and he wants to help, but he also isn't going to just do whatever she asks him to because like it's just not appropriate. I also like have sort of tried to give her like a decent working relationship overall with the police. It's not like every cop in the city stands beside of her. There are definitely some that she runs up against with a bit more friction than others, but to sort of have that nod to all of these, books in our genre where the detective runs afoul of the local police department, and that's like part of the story. To just try to do that in a new way with like a new take on it, and just also creating sort of characters that aren't your main characters, like giving them real characteristics helps that too. Like, you can use a plot device type of trope, but if you have realistic, well-drawn characters, it's going to feel real. It's not going to feel like formulaic, which I think is, that's what we all want to avoid, is like writing anything that feels formulaic in any way.
Well, let's because you referenced the relationship with the police and PIs. If we could talk a little bit about the police portrayals in crime fiction in general. And this was the major point really of my conversation with John Fram, who wrote The Bright Lands I referenced earlier before we hopped on. And that conversation was ignited because he wrote an op-ed really kind of holding the crime writing community accountable for the way police have been portrayed for, in PI fiction. I think we get to be a little on the side of this problem because for so long, private investigators have to work around the police and are often have antagonistic relationships with them. But the police procedural, and this is true for TV and movies and books and everything, but that portraying the police in a invariably positive light, or at least assuming they're always there to help, that's something that I think is really worth examining in all crime and mystery fiction. And how do we do that in PI fiction?
Well, I think that like anyone who up till now has been writing books about the idea of the hero cops have got to stop doing that, because we've seen time and time again, and this isn't new, of course, this has been going on for ages, since as long as there have been police. Like, police are probably a more or less accurate cross-section of humanity. Some people are terrible, some people are good people, but you can't just assume that this is a noble profession and that everyone who is a cop has interests in mind of protecting. There are people who want to take advantage and abuse power, and it's pretty irresponsible, I think, to write about police without acknowledging that. And it's certainly true that, like, I don't want to see the genre flooded with books about horrible cops doing horrible things, not getting, like, that's not the answer here, is to write about this problem. The answer is to be careful about romanticizing that profession and making it seem like cops are all good, and there is, like, we have to write realistically about everything, including the real world implications of the current abuse of power in policing. So I think that maybe more so than other types of books, crime novels have always been social novels and dealing with the sort of points of tension between different groups of society. And, like, right now, this is very much one of those points of tension, and it's in the forefront, as it should be. We can't skip over it. We have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge that there are problems. We also can't co-opt stories that aren't ours to tell about, the fact that people of color are much more likely to be on the receiving end of police violence than white people. So we shouldn't, all of us white writers should not run out there and start writing books from the point of view of a Black character. That's not what we can do. What we can do is write police more realistically, and also lift up the voices of writers of color so that those stories can be told authentically.
Right.
And I really think that, like, in terms of, there's so many TV shows that are just, you'll occasionally see, like, a dirty cop and he's stealing drugs and selling them. Like, that's not the type of corruption and abuse that is so endemic. It's, like, so much more ingrained and accepted. Like, if you watch cop shows from the 90s, they will just, like, beat up suspects and without thinking twice. Until I've watched that now, it's really kind of, it's gross to see it. And to think that, like, at the time we didn't perceive it as problematic, and, like, it was, but we didn't recognize it as such. So I think that, like, just we have to be mindful of that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that caught me up, in talking to John about this, and a lot of the points you just made. One of them is that the reality that I think people miss, and largely because people that are producing creative content, whether it's for the screen or the page, the cases need to be solved, right? They need to, like, there needs to be a resolution. They need to solve them. And, police traditionally, even though the methods are often ugly, they're quite good at preventing crime. And they're actually quite poor at solving crimes. I mean, when you look at the statistics, there's a 40% chance that you'll get away with murder. There's a better than even chance that you will get away with any extreme felony. So, some of that portrayal, I think, just needs to reflect the realism of crime solving, whether it's, and it's lovely that as, working in the PI genre, you can subvert that a little bit. But when for instance, I'm looking at the new Michael Connelly on my left elbow. Harry Bosch has a 100% success rate, and
right.
and he's solving some of the hardest crimes in the world. And as much as I love Michael Connelly, that's that gives a very, very skewed perspective on what's actually happening in these departments. They might be able to prevent it, but they're not really solving that great a rate.
That's true. And there's also, we have to sort of acknowledge that there is a difference between solving a case and closing a case.
Yes.
Because so often, I think the goal of police in general is to close the case. And like, it is, naive to think there are not people in prison who've been wrongfully convicted, or people who are wrongfully charged with crimes. And like, you can kind of understand it, because if it appears that someone probably did it, sure, why not? Like, it is not necessarily the sole responsibility of police to like deal with the problems that run end to end in our justice system. They are just a part of it. There's a lot of other parts that also create this issue. But like, to tell realistic criminal justice stories they wouldn't make for great novels. Like, here's here's
no resolution.
No resolution. It goes on for a while. Every 6 months the detective calls the victim and checks in, and there's nothing new, and then they move on to another case. Like, that's not a good story. So we have to balance. No, like, we want to entertain, we want to perhaps educate, but in like a sneaky way, so that it doesn't feel like we're lecturing anybody. We want to tell stories that are interesting and thought-provoking, but we also want to make sure that we are not like telling a good story at the expense of, like, we don't want to take advantage of these real issues and use them to tell stories that sell our books but do nothing to change people's minds, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a tricky balance, because as you referenced earlier, I mean, crime novels, especially when they're done well, are social novels. They're commentaries on society, and they have to be anchored in plot and character, so they have to be driving forward, but there always has to be a social aspect to it.
Right. It would feel very artificial to tell, especially like a procedural type novel, whether it's police or a private investigator, that's about like, investigating and dealing with victims and perpetrators. Like, you can't write that kind of story without anchoring it in a time and place, and so like, it's impossible to even think about our world right now without thinking about all of these issues. And it's just make believe for anyone to even pretend that we can.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the social issues that you touch upon in your latest. I really enjoyed your one of your themes within the church and and the cultness of I always like, I mean, let's face it, the Catholic Church in particular has been pretty rich terrain for a lot of crime writers, because there's so much crime within it. You're not referencing the Catholic Church in this one, but the manipulation within certain fellowships and how people can be manipulated. Is that a theme that is personal to you, that in terms of growing up with a certain faith or being cynical?
Well, being cynical definitely shapes everything that I have ever written, for sure. But like Roxanne, I was raised Catholic, and like Roxanne, it didn't take. So like, I sort of had the perspective of sort of seeing that type of faith without understanding it or feeling it. And like, as to be someone who is like seeing your peers who really seem to believe in something that you just don't see and don't believe, it's like, it's a very strange and kind of isolating feeling. And so the problems of the Catholic Church are, of course, quite well documented, and I don't need to write any books about that. But I wanted to sort of write about the idea of these like modern, hip seeming churches that are actually a little scary if you look closer. And there like the idea of organized religion is of course a very wide gamut, and you have like sort of your traditional religions, and then you have like crazy cults that believe they're aliens and have, you know, there's just like it's a range, of course. And so I wanted to write about a religion that on the surface looks respectable enough, like it's a part of the community and people don't perceive it as like, oh, those people are crazy, we should stay away from them. It's sort of just like they're part of the fabric of the community. But when you really stop and look at the way that people interact with each other, there's something very wrong there. So I just kind of wanted to play with like, where is the line that is like, where is it too far? Like, where is faith? Where does it stop being a comfort and a uniting characteristic and begin being mind control?
Yeah.
And so like, it's kind of scary to think about. And I did some truly terrifying research, just, you know, listening to a lot of podcasts about people with experience being in cults and leaving cults. And there's a pretty big group here where I live in Ohio that it wasn't really an inspiration for this group that I wrote about, but like there are some chilling things that you can read about the way that, you know, people exist under others' control, and it's all happening right in front of us. So
There's actually a passage. I don't want to click it up, read it verbatim, because then I'll lose the screen. But I made a note of it. I was on page 151 and 152 that I circled. It was so great where it was a character basically explaining what her conception within the church of this is who sinners are, who we need to stay away from, and proceeded to list off anyone who drinks or does drugs or has sex or associates with anyone who has any kind of homosexuality, or any friends. I mean, basically rattled off. And after I read off her definition of it, I was like, well, that's basically everybody that I will know or
exactly.
or what know. Like I don't know any people that aren't guilty of at least like 2 or 3 of the 8 so-called sins that
the sins
that you rolled off. But I just loved how you just made it very self-evident. Like, okay, here's the judgment, and
right. It's like, okay, this is not a church. This is something else. Like, this is a sect. This is an insular group that exists in its own echo chamber, and they're not connected to the real world that we live in at all. If they truly think that their entire circle is innocent of these, you know, so-called sins, then like obviously this is a group that has some real problems.
Yeah, and the ones that are probably the most judgmental about it are probably the ones that are the most most be repressing the most or guilty of all the things
exactly
that they're judging.
Yes, that is true.
But I really enjoyed that thread. You know, what are some other themes? I feel like we all have go-to themes or obsessions that kind of wind through. Mine is I have an obsession with the crookedness of high finance, for instance. And what are some of the themes that you find yourself returning to all the time?
Well, I think that I could probably write about like a crime that happened 20 years into someone's past. Like, I could write a million books about that. Like, I love the idea of revisiting something that happened a long time ago through a new lens. That's definitely like all of my ideas start with that at some point, and then because I don't want to write the same book over and over again, kind of have to massage that to tease the real story out of it. But in terms of this new book, I also have a lot of politics as a major theme. And when I wrote this book, I was like, I hope my editor doesn't hate this, because, you know, you want to write a book that's entertaining. You want to write a book that is going to feel relevant whenever anyone reads it. So you don't want to anchor the book too firmly to, like, this book is taking place in the year 2020. And when you're looking back in even 2 years, because like shit moves real fast right now and it changes like wildly. So you don't want to write something that is an unrecognizable reality in just a few years. But like the idea of people doing whatever it takes to conceal secrets is like the ultimate timeless story. We will never run out of that story, and
Yeah,
that's really like at
that
the
is
heart of
evergreen.
so many stories that we tell. It's just the, you have a secret, no one can know. What are you going to do? How far would you go to cover it up? And so like I think that is just, it's so intriguing, the idea of people who are sort of faced with that moment of having to decide what would you do to prevent people from finding out about this. And I think that's a really, there's so much fodder there. There's so much, uh, there's so many possibilities of the different places that you can take it. So I'm team secrets forever.
Well, it also, I think, prevents plots from being dated, because if you try to I mean, unless you're writing historical fiction, I don't see how, we're both writing books that are set in the present tense. And that's a tricky thing to get around. I mean, right now, I'm what I'm working on is set a year or two away. And how can you not reference the pandemic, but yet you don't really know how things will unfold? And
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, every fiction writer in whatever genre is reckoning with this, unless you're writing historical fiction, because
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true, because like to write about like right now without acknowledging it feels false, but it's also like we're still in the midst of it. We don't know what's going to happen. Like we don't want to, write an entire book that speaks to something that in 5 years people aren't even going to really remember. Although at this point it seems unlikely that this is going to just fade from everyone's consciousness too quickly. But
yeah,
like, are we going to have to write like lockdown mysteries? Or are our characters going to be solving crimes on Zoom? Like, I hope not. It
yeah,
could happen. Like things could get weird. If the longer this goes on, the more it seems very possible that we're going to have to change a lot about the way that we write characters, or even just like, wearing masks. Like it would seem super weird to just throw that out as a detail in the books that I have written in the past. But like we're going to see it for a while now, like people wearing masks out in public. And is that something that we want to use, or is that something that's just going to make it feel weird and
yeah,
take
or
it too
just
quickly?
acknowledge does it root it too much in a time capsule?
Yeah.
Um, it's I remember ever saying that no good books came out of September 11th until 5, 6 years, 10 years down the line.
Mm.
um, and I'm sure there's already a rush, and I'm sure publishers are buying pandemic novels just like they were buying post 9/11 novels. But
Right.
I think it's going to take some time, like before I mean, you need context within a
Yes.
novel. There's no
Yeah.
context now, there's
No.
no context from yesterday. I mean,
No. No. Exactly. Like you need context, and you need to actually be post whatever it is, and we're very much not. We don't know what the arc of this is going to be. We're still like in the early days probably, and so it's sort of like it would be silly to even try to predict, because even looking back 4 months ago, you couldn't have predicted this is where we would be. Um, it's terrifying.
yeah, yeah. There's going to be a lot of rewriting. I'm almost grateful. Like I can't imagine the folks that have a novel set in like some kind of political context in 2020 that's
Oh,
due to come out this fall,
oh
and
my
then
gosh,
like
I know.
they because the publishing lead time is, I mean, it's maddening, right? How long the
Right.
gestation takes between the purchasing of a novel. A lot of folks don't realize that, like,
Hmm.
it's 2 years by the
Right.
time from the time your first novel sells before it comes out. And
Yep.
if there's a debut novel coming out in this fall that's set during the summer of 2020, that's wow.
Yeah,
Becomes
it's gonna be
problematic.
tough. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to feel like it runs the risk of being really out of touch from the world that we're living in. And it's like, in some ways, like it's not like, it wouldn't serve writers to like finish writing a book and then, 2 days later it's published. Like it is a process that requires a lot of introspection, which helps you make the work better. And you'll see like anyone who self-publishes a book 2 days after they completed writing it, like they're doing something wrong there. Of course, like you need
of course
time. But like things are moving so fast now that, writing about specific current events, like it's just crazy. I like if you think back to 2017, like I was on a book tour in London and then on the East Coast, and I was gone from home for like 2 weeks, and I missed the entire tenure of Anthony Scaramucci, the entire thing. I missed it. Like I was like on tour for the entire thing.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where it's like things move so fast now that you can't like see something happening and be like, oh, I'm gonna reference this because like that might be over tomorrow. It might be over tomorrow and 10 more things that are even crazier might happen. And not only will it be no longer relevant, but it'll be completely forgotten by everybody, which is, pretty crazy.
Yeah, the trying to mine the contemporary in any sort of fiction right now is it's a dangerous game.
Yeah, yeah, it really is.
So not to take a hard left from that topic, but one thing I really wanted to get to before we finish up is the spirit of place that is, I think we all crime writers really have to take that seriously. Wherever you set your novels needs to come through as almost a character in itself. And there's not a lot of crime fiction from the Ohio, Columbus area. You take from Columbus, we go up to Detroit, we go over the border to Windsor for a bit. And, tell me a little bit about, I know you live in the Midwest and how the Midwest anchors the series and this character.
So like I was saying earlier, with wanting to create a bi character, I really wanted to write about Columbus because like there are so many novels that are in this genre, PI stories that are set in the big cities in this country, but medium-sized cities have just as many problems, sometimes even more problems. Like if you look at the crime rate of Columbus, even though it's a mid-sized city, like there are a lot of problems here. There are a lot of murders here. It's a good place to set a crime novel, just because there's a lot of crime that's genuinely happening, and so I think there's a lot of natural storytelling just with the city. But a thing that I think makes a place like Columbus interesting is like, for example, if you are in the heart of New York City and you drive for an hour, you're still definitely in New York City. If you're in Columbus and you drive for an hour, you are surrounded by cornfields. So we're a real city, but it does not take very long to get yourself completely out of the city, and it's a whole different world out there. Like we have, in Ohio, very urban liberal cities surrounded by very rural conservative areas, which creates tension that makes for interesting storytelling as well. And I think with this new book, this church that I have characters involved with very much comes from a conservative ideology. Like they are set outside of the city. They're up in like a small city, Toledo, and like that tension of existing outside of anyone who is a queer person or a divorced person or a person who uses drugs or whatever. Like only a place that is truly geographically isolated could even consider its members to be free of those types of things. So like it really creates like geographically interesting conflicts between characters automatically, which is something that I write about in I think all of my books to some extent, that like you leave the city and who knows what's going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. Like you might run afoul of any number of strange things. But also Columbus is just a great city to live in. It's really fun to write about a city that I live in because I can easily go out and scout for locations, which is a lot of fun. And as someone who grew up reading PI novels that were set in Boston or New York City or Chicago, like my original ideas were about those cities, because I was like, that's what mysteries are. That's what PI novels are. They're set in big cities. And it was really just sort of a process of figuring out what my own voice was and what I wanted to say, that I realized that I want to write about, you know, the city that I live in. I want to write about this place that's so real to me. And it's definitely true that you need to sort of feel the city in the pages. Otherwise, you're not.
Absolutely.
You need to feel like you're on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
for sure.
I couldn't agree more. And the way you just described Ohio, it makes good sense that so much of the presidential election hinges on that state. Because I mean, you have every segment, and it's it's pretty self-evident why that state is just so essential in terms of whichever way this country moves.
Yeah, the swing state situation is real. Like, we have three major cities of Cincinnati, Columbus, which is where I live, and Cleveland, and then the rest of the state is basically, you know, red. It's like three blue dots on a map. And like, Columbus is the largest city in the state. It's the state capital. It's like in the top 15 largest cities in the country. And yet people confuse us all the time with other places. Like, I remember a few years ago, when the Cleveland Cavs were in the NBA Finals, ESPN showed a picture of Cleveland, but it was actually a picture of Columbus. Like, people don't even know the difference. We're different. Like, it's distinct.
And that's ESPN, who should know better, with Ohio State being.
Yeah, they really should know better. Come on.
Yeah.
But like, it's, you know, it's a lot of fun for me to write about a place that I've lived for so long. And I know that, like, I have so many awesome local readers who also love seeing their city on the pages, because, like, even outside of mysteries, Columbus, Ohio is just not a common setting for books or movies or anything. Like, the sci-fi dystopian novel Ready Player One is set in like an imaginary version of Columbus. And when that movie was coming out, I was in a theater, and when movie theaters were a thing, remember those?
When you could go to a theater.
When you could go to a theater and watch a movie. But like, they were playing this trailer for this movie, Ready Player One, and it has a voiceover, and the character says, the first line of the trailer is, "I live in Columbus, Ohio," and all of the people in the theater were like, "Oh my God!" Like, they were so excited. It's you know, they deserve it. They deserve books set here. So it's
absolutely
a lot of fun, for sure.
All right, I know we're just about out of time, so I want to thank you so much. It was a blast talking to you. I wish we could get together and toast at BoucherCon this year, but in future years, when we can actually mingle in real life, we'll
exactly. Yes, we'll make it happen for sure. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great.
Thank you. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, you as well.
Have a great one.
You too.